Okay, so the first thing I want to say is that I think I'm in a really unique position today. I'm about as homegrown as they come. I went to high school at St. Joseph Scholar Hall, watching now. I went to Nipissing. I have been teaching at Nipissing for the last 7 years. And every week, I teach a class in this room at this time. So, welcome to my classroom. Finally, thank you. Finally, I have the audience I always thought I deserved. Maybe they didn't, that's how they decided to ask me. They were like, well, she's already in the room. Just let her talk. Okay, so what I want to talk to you about today is, in some ways, like the best idea, simple, but I think potentially really transformative. And I want to talk about the classroom. I love university classrooms. I always say to my students that if I had my choice, I would get paid to spend all my time as a student in university classrooms. But so far, not a career option. So I am trying to humbly continue to train myself to feel worthy of the position that is at the front of the classroom. And I think that the university classroom is one of the most underused resources that we have for what we need to accomplish as a community in the 21st century. That's my idea. Now, my love of the classroom started out a little rocky. So when I was 19 years old, I was arrogant, and I thought, I'm out of high school. I was like, I want to travel, forget the establishment. I want to see the world. I want to go to the school of life. I want to go to university. Everybody's going to university. So I saved up and I went traveling, and like most kids who think that that's what they want to do, I would come home in between trips to my parents' house where they would feed me and clothe me and basically, foot the bill for my exploits. And one of those sessions, I was at home, and my mom, who was attending university at Nipissing for most of her life, said to me in the very gentle way that she does, she said, why don't you just come with me to a class? Just come on, just come, it'll be fun. And I was like, oh, really? Okay, fine. So I went with her, and it was the most amazing experience. I slept, and my mom took notes. It was wonderful. And as I was thinking about sharing that story with you, I was thinking, actually, I started to have more memories of that time. And I think that even though I would, well, in my defense, the class was at noon. I mean, that's early. So, I'm a 19-year-old up all night. So, but I would actually sit there in the class with my head down napping. But still, despite that, think about how audacious this is. I would still put up my hand once in a while, emerge from my sleep, and shoot my hand up because I had to say something. I mean, that professor was so nice to allow me to do that. So since then, and it's been many years since then, I have come to fall absolutely madly in love with the university classroom space and what it can do. For those high school students watching, I can say this to you. I don't think there's any better drug than the university classroom. I remember when I took my first philosophy class, I would say to people, I go in there and I leave, and every single time, the world looks different. I am different. That's amazing. And how many years now later, 12 years into university training, I'm still not tired of it. And now, what I get, though, is the students and what the students give me. So I want to talk to you about how, then, the university is this phenomenal resource, and we're underusing it. So why is that? What does the university classroom do? What does it do so well? Well, first of all, I think that in university classrooms, we talk about everything that we're talking about here today. We talk about it all the time. I show up here every week, and I, with my students, say, let's figure out how to make the world better. So we're doing that. If you pay attention to the kind of public discourse that's going on right now, where are the spaces where people can engage And this is, sort of one of the details of what I want to say to you that I think is so crucial, is that it's not enough to just have a space where you can talk to people. The internet is not enough, because the internet is a tool, and the internet is a tool that we can either use to spread hate, to spread lies, to spread ignorance, or it's a place where we can spread good ideas and knowledge and truth. And in its most ideal form, and I know it's idealistic, the university is supposed to be that space where people are in the process of trying to figure things out, trying to build the knowledge that we need. So this is the place where you can't, it's not just about having a debate, it's about having an educated and an informed debate. And that is a huge difference. So let's look at the kind of public debate that we see out in the world. Look at the kind of conversations that we see in the House of Representatives in the United States and Congress, in our legislatures, the fighting, the caustic environments. I was just listening to a man on the CBC, an MP, talking about how he's crying out for help. I think that they ended up interviewing him because he sent a tweet out talking about how he was just so worried about what was going to happen to our communities, to our societies, because he had been an MP for 30 years, and he said that the environment in the legislature now is not a meaningful space for dialogue. People, the public conversation is one that so often is about people sort of remaining attached to what they already think. I hate it when people call politicians flip-floppers. What, are you supposed to know all your ideas and then never change it? I mean, that's an odd way to approach leadership. It's also an odd way to approach leadership, to look for that one person who's going to have all the answers, have all the certainty. Now, I'm not going to go into all the detail of sort of the background of the philosophy that I've learned that has helped me understand the tradition that we come from in Western society that has us thinking like that has us searching for this kind of certainty and not searching for what we don't know. And that's what the best university classroom gives you. It makes you want to know what you don't already know. So I want to say a few more things about what I think a good university classroom does. A good university classroom teaches complexity. Sometimes I think that if there's one thing that I teach every week in all the schools that I'm teaching at, it's that. The world is complex. Look at, Dr. Saleh, look at, other people that we've heard who are showing us an environmental world that is, in grave jeopardy. How are we going to solve that? It is so complex. We need to become new people. We're the wrong kind of people for the problems we have. How are we going to become new people? Where are we going to become new people? Well, I learned in that first university class, in that philosophy class, that I could become a different person. So to me, the best university classes make that possible. They make it possible for us to become the people that we need to be for the problems that we have. And we need to understand that those problems are complex, and the task ahead of us is enormous. Complexity. Holistic thinking. You need to be able to think about things as being integrated. University classrooms are at their worst when they teach myopic, narrow-minded, deeply disciplinary ways of thinking. That's why we're having an explosion in the idea of interdisciplinarity, the interdisciplinary classroom. So you need to be able to think holistically. When our universities don't produce people that are constantly interested in what's happening in other disciplines, in asking for other people to help them with what they can't figure out, I think partly what we produce are things like the financial crisis of 2008. And I have been boring my students since 2008 talking about the financial crisis of 2008. Because for me, the world changed. After that happened, we should have all been like, wow, we got it wrong. We have to go back to the drawing board. We have to rethink the whole thing. Because the people who are the most educated and the most outrageously compensated for supposedly being the people who are paying attention to the most important system that we have, the economic system, that keeps everything afloat, those people couldn't see that what they were doing was going to fall apart and explode. That's amazing. I mean, it's terrible, and we're still living with the consequences of it. But my goodness, if that isn't a sort of moment where you start to question the kinds of ways you think, I don't know what is. So you need holistic learning. We can't have people who are studying economics and not having to think about literature and not having to think about ethics and not, everything has to be integrated. So a good university classroom is holistic. It teaches empathy. The Khan Academy is so amazing. I love that idea. But I think that for me, where I come into that is I say, what we can do with online learning is amazing, but as he said, we come into the classroom after, and that's where you do your homework. That's underselling what happens in the classroom after you watch that lecture. You come to that classroom after because you come to be with other people. You come because that is where you're going to encounter others, other human beings. I always say to my students that the participation grade that is standard for every university class is not about a relationship between them and me. That's how they think of it. They put up their hand. I say, if you are like I was, putting up your hand all the time and talking all the time, that's not participation. It's not about what you're showing me. It's about you caring about each other. That's what I think participation is. That for the duration of a university class space, you have to be invested in each other. I can't tell you how excited I get when a student puts up their hand and says, I agree with Linda. They know her name. They learned one of their fellow classmates' name. And Nipissing isn't bad because and that's part of I think what's so amazing about a campus like this and a small school and treat sort of seeing your local school as this incredible resource. But when I go to York, when I'm teaching at York or at OCAD, they feel much more lost in the sort of the abyss of these enormous institutions. So them learning one other person's name in that class is an amazing thing. And it happens, rarely, but it happens. So empathy, being able to think beyond your, the limit of your own face, being interested in other people. That, I think, is one of the things that I've learned from the philosophy that I studied. That's one of the best things that I learned is that, it feels good to feel like you know things, to feel certain, to feel confident. That's a good feeling, but it's not as good as feeling like you have so much to learn from all the other people around you. From being able to feel like, I always describe it like this. If it's just you, if everything that you're going to think, everything you're going to know just comes from you, that's it, you're done. It's so finite. Other people represent infinity. It's an infinite amount of possibilities. And you know what? Most of the time, a lot of the time, we experience that as something harsh, right? Oh, this person's doing this thing. I don't want them to do it. Why don't they stop? Oh, my partner, my girlfriend, my boyfriend, my wife. Oh, they're behaving this way. If only they could see my point of view. If only they could understand that this is that I'm right and they're wrong. We're so trained in that kind of thinking, that kind of clinging to our own certainty. And a good university classroom, I think, inspires you to move outside of yourself, to treat that as something that is a phenomenal gift, to have other people share their lives with you. And just on that topic of empathy, I think that one of the things that every university classroom should be doing is teaching ethics. You should not be able to take a university class without there being some component of that asks you to think ethically about the world. It needs to be ethical chemistry, ethical physics, ethical English, ethical. Because we are 7 billion people. And I think we are at a crossroads. We can head in a direction that's going to make a lot of those lives of those 7 billion people a lot worse. And it's going to take something pretty phenomenal to try and ensure that those 7 billion people, soon to be many more billion, have the best chance possible to have the most meaningful and dignified life. So we need to remake ourselves. If we're going to be new people, we need to be people who are deeply committed to ethics. And finally, a good university classroom is about dialogue. It's about engaging with other people. And as I said, I think I came to this idea that I wanted to talk to you about today because I have been, as you all are, living in the world and feeling so worried about the lack of meaningful, educated, informed discourse and conversation that I'm encountering. You know, I was listening to the CBC Monk debate, that they fabulous debate. They bring these sort of scholars, some of the leading scholars, and the most recent one was about economics, and they had Paul Krugman, who writes for the New York Times. And, you know, Krugman said something that really struck me. They asked him, you know, the question on the table was, are we sort of moving into a recessionary period that's going to last for, you know, probably, the question was, is it going to be an era, so a really long period of economic sort of recession. And Krugman, his final point was, he said, you know what, we have the ideas. We can not go down that road. What we don't have is the social and the political will to do what we need to do. And I just thought, you know, how do you create that? How do you engender that will, that commitment to doing what we need to do? Where are the spaces where we're going to come together and we're going to figure out, where we're going to workshop and we're going to try and experiment, and we're going to say, we've got to go back to the drawing board, we've got to start from scratch. How are we going to remake the world? How are we going to stop relying on fossil fuels? How are we going to make the world livable for 7 billion people? How are we going to do that? I think that the university classroom should be a space that we think of as the public sphere. This is public. This is ours. The public sphere is an idea. It's been around for quite a while. It's probably been around since the Greeks. I'm sure many cultures have had a different version of this, but the version that I first learned, which was called the public sphere, the authors were talking about how you can't have a democracy unless you have a place for people to come together and have a meaningful and informed and educated conversation. So, you know, people like Naomi Klein, fabulous Canadian activist, scholar, you know, in her book, No Logo, I remember being very affected by that. She talked about the death of the commons. And as, you know, and so for so long I've been thinking about how that's so sad, and we really need these spaces for public discourse. And then it dawned on me, we have them. You're in it right now. And the great thing about being at TED is that I feel like I don't even have to convince you of what I'm saying because you're here. You know. So don't make TED it. Let's take back our university classrooms. Let's make them the spaces that we don't just go to for 3 or 4 years and never think about again until we have to pay a fortune for our kids to go there. Let's make them ours. Let's make them these fabulous experimental think tanks where we can work out the world that we need. Final story. This one has stayed with me for a while. A student last year here at Bracebridge, the class was visual culture. We were about halfway through the term. It was a very small class, so we were getting pretty comfortable with each other. And we were talking about sort of what brought us to that classroom. And this lovely student, very quiet, you know, great student, and a mature student, so in his mid-50s. And, you know, he hadn't really said much, and then so halfway through he says, you know, we were saying, you know, sort of, you know, what brought you here to this classroom? And he said, well, about a year ago, I took my dad, he took his dad out for lunch, and he said to him, Dad, you know, I did everything I was supposed to do. I got married, I had kids, I got a good job, I've got a house, I've got a cottage, I've got a boat. The kids are going off to university, they're doing well, they're successful. I did it all, I did everything I was supposed to do. And then he said to his dad, is that it? And his dad said, yep, that's it. And this student said, that's not enough. And he came here. Thank you.